The drive from Charlotte took 4 hours and 12 minutes, and Lenora Voss made it in silence. No music, no podcasts, no calls routed through the Bluetooth system of her dark green Volvo sedan, a 12-year-old car she had kept in meticulous condition for reasons that had nothing to do with sentiment. She simply did not trust newer models and had no interest in acquiring things she did not need. The car ran. The car was clean. The car was hers. She had packed light, a single rolling bag navy blue mid-sized with a telescoping handle that no longer fully locked into position, but could be coaxed into stability if you knew the angle. She knew the angle. She had been traveling with that bag for 7 years. Beside it on the back seat sat a canvas tote containing 3 legal briefs, a yellow legal pad, 2 black pens, a Bluetooth keyboard she rarely used but always brought, and a worn paperback copy of John Hope Franklin's From Slavery to Freedom that she reread every 2 or 3 years, not because she had forgotten it, but because she found something different in it each time. She was 54 years old. She had served as a United States Circuit Judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals for 9 years. Before that, she had spent 11 years as a federal public defender, 3 years as a civil rights litigator in private practice, and the earliest part of her legal career as a clerk for a district court judge in Baltimore, who had told her on her last day with characteristic bluntness that she was the best law clerk he had ever had and that the bar was very high. She had thanked him and meant it. She did not look like what most people expected a federal appellate judge to look like. And she knew this, and she had known it for so long that the knowledge had long since stopped producing any particular feeling. It was simply a fact, like the distance between Charlotte and Hilton Head, like the weight of the rolling bag, like the way the landscape flattened and warmed as she crossed into South Carolina, and the live oaks began to close over the highway. In their particular way, Spanish moss and filtered light, and the specific quality of humidity that made even the air feel older here. She had booked the stay 6 weeks ago. 5 nights at Cedar Cliff Grand Resort on Hilton Head Island, a property she had chosen from a list of 3 options after approximately 15 minutes of deliberation. The deciding factor had not been the reviews, which were uniformly glowing, in the way of places that employed people to manage their online reputation, or the amenities which she had no intention of using in their entirety, but a single practical consideration. The resort had a members' terrace overlooking the 18th hole of the affiliated golf course, a wide outdoor space with cafe seating, and a morning service that ran from 7 until 11. She did not play golf. She had no interest in golf. But she had spent enough time in enough courtrooms to have developed an appreciation for wide-open, well-lit spaces where one could spread papers across a table and think without being interrupted. And the photographs of that terrace, all stone tile and morning shade and unobstructed sky, had suggested exactly that. The reservation had been made under her name, Lenora A. Voss. Confirmation number CG-2025-04-3318, Ocean Adjacent Junior Suite on the 2nd floor, 5 nights prepaid in full check-in date, April 14th. She had also, as was her habit, noted in a small calendar entry, that the resort was 41 miles from the federal building in Columbia and 62 miles from the Beaufort County Courthouse. Not because she expected to need either, but because a judge who did not know the distance between herself and the nearest federal building had, in her view, already begun to lose the thread of something important. She arrived at the resort gate at 2:47 in the afternoon. The gatehouse was staffed by a young man in a white polo shirt with the Cedar Cliff emblem on the breast pocket, a stylized cedar tree above the letter C rendered in dark green. He had a clipboard, a scanner, and the practiced efficiency of someone who had processed a great many cars and had developed opinions about which ones warranted attention and which ones did not. Lenora's Volvo was 12 years old. She was dressed in a linen blouse, the color of warm sand, dark slacks, and flat shoes. Her hair was natural, pulled back with a tortoiseshell clip. The reading glasses she wore when reviewing documents were folded and hooked into the collar of her blouse. The gateman glanced at the car, then at her, then at his clipboard. Name on the reservation. Voss L. Voss. He typed, scanned. The gate lifted. He handed her a parking pass and a small laminated card with the resort map on one side and the Wi-Fi password on the other. and he did it all without once looking at her directly. She drove through without comment. The resort itself was everything the photographs had promised, and a few things they had not. The main building was a broad white structure of colonial proportions, 3 stories tall, with dark shutters and a wraparound veranda on the ground level where wicker chairs faced the manicured grounds. The driveway was lined with palmetto palms, their trunks perfectly spaced, their fronds moving in the salt-threaded breeze that came off the ocean a quarter mile to the east. The parking valet, 2 young men in matching polos who moved with the coordinated ease of people who had been trained to make movement look effortless, stepped forward as she slowed to a stop. She declined the valet service. She preferred to park her own car. One of the young men blinked, then nodded, and directed her to the guest lot with a gesture so smooth it had almost certainly been practiced. She parked, collected her rolling bag and her canvas tote, and walked toward the main entrance. The lobby was high-ceilinged, pale-walled, and smelled of something floral and expensive. The floor was pale stone polished to a reflective sheen. The furniture was white and natural linen arranged in groupings that suggested conversation without requiring it. At the far end of the lobby, floor-to-ceiling windows framed a view of the lower grounds. The pool terrace and beyond it, the long green corridor of the golf course ending in the distance at a flag that barely moved. There were 11 people in the lobby when Lenora entered. She counted them automatically as she counted exits and camera positions. 2 couples near the windows, a family of 4 near the concierge station. 1 older man reading a newspaper in a wingback chair, and a woman in resort staff uniform moving between tables with a tray. The front desk was a curved counter of pale wood and brushed nickel, staffed by 2 clerks. The one on the left was a woman in her late 20s with auburn hair and the particular kind of professional smile that is constructed rather than felt. Her name tag read, Paige Dunmore, Guest Experience. Lenora approached the counter, checking in. Reservation under Voss. Confirmation CG-2025-04-3318. Paige typed. Her eyes moved across the monitor. Then they moved back to the top of the screen, then across again. I am showing a reservation under Voss, Paige said, but it looks like the suite assignment may have changed since your booking. It looks like there has been an adjustment in our inventory. Lenora waited. I have you in a Garden View Standard King on the 1st floor. That is actually a lovely room, quieter side of the building, great access to the spa. My confirmation states an ocean-adjacent junior suite on the 2nd floor, Lenora said. She did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward. She produced her phone from the canvas tote and placed it on the counter screen, up confirmation email open. Prepaid. 5 nights. I would like the room I reserved. Paige looked at the phone the way someone looks at evidence they were hoping not to encounter. She typed again. The second clerk, a younger man whose name tag read, Connor, glanced over from his own monitor and then carefully looked away. There was a pause of approximately 14 seconds. Let me speak with my supervisor, Paige said. Please. The supervisor was a man of about 45, named Davis Trull, who had the groomed, slightly anxious look of someone who had learned that almost every guest problem was manageable if handled with sufficient pleasantness. He appeared from a door behind the counter. Within 3 minutes introduced himself with a handshake, looked at Lenora's confirmation on the phone, and had the room restored to the junior suite in the time it took him to type 4 lines. There was no apology. There was an explanation about system migration, which was offered in the same tone one might use to describe an act of God, and there was a smile, and there was a key card produced in a small branded envelope. Lenora took the key card, thanked Davis Trull without inflection, collected her bag, and found her room. The junior suite on the 2nd floor was as advertised, ocean adjacent. The window faced east and south, and in the late afternoon light, the water was visible as a flat line of silver beyond the lower grounds. The room was clean, well-appointed, and quiet. Lenora set her rolling bag on the luggage rack, placed the canvas tote on the writing desk by the window, and stood for a moment looking at the water. She had passed the bar 25 years ago today. She had not celebrated any of the intervening anniversaries with anything more elaborate than a good dinner. This year, she had decided with the precise deliberation she brought to most decisions that PT days at a resort on the South Carolina coast constituted an appropriate acknowledgement of a quarter century in the law. She unpacked methodically, Clothes to hangers and drawers. Legal materials arranged on the desk in the order she would need them. The Franklin paperback on the nightstand. A photograph of her late mother printed on regular paper and tucked into the back cover of a legal pad placed beside the paperback. That evening she walked the resort grounds alone. She wore the same linen blouse and dark slacks now slightly wrinkled from the drive. She carried nothing. She walked the full perimeter of the main building along the garden path that connected the pool terrace to the lower grounds around the edge of the golf course where the grass was manicured to an almost aggressive precision. She walked slowly and without apparent purpose, which was deceptive because she had a great deal of purpose and it expressed itself most accurately in observation. She noticed that the guests she passed on the path, a couple walking a small dog. 2 men in golf shirts consulting a shared phone. An older woman in a wide hat reading in a garden chair, registered her with a flicker of calculation before returning to their conversation or their screens. Not hostility, not exactly. Something more like the involuntary adjustment of a system, encountering something it had not been configured to expect. She noticed that the staff members she passed a groundskeeper, 2 young women in resort uniforms, carrying stacked towels, did not look at her with the same flicker. They looked at her with a different kind of attention, the attentiveness of people trained to identify whether an approaching person requires service or oversight. She noticed that there was exactly one other black guest visible on the grounds during the full 40 minutes of her walk, a man in his 60s alone sitting near the far end of the pool terrace with a glass of iced tea who met her eyes briefly as she passed and gave a small contained nod that communicated in the specific silent language of people who are accustomed to being the only one in certain rooms, something like, "Yes, I see it too." She nodded back. Then she returned to her room, ordered room service, grilled fish, roasted vegetables, a glass of still water, and spent the remainder of the evening reviewing a draft opinion on a Fourth Amendment suppression issue that had been sitting in her folder since before she left Charlotte. She was in bed by 10. The alarm was set for 6:30. She slept well, which was characteristic. Lenora Voss had spent decades making decisions that affected people's lives, freedom, and futures. She had learned early that the only way to do that work with any integrity was to rest properly, and she was disciplined about it. She was on the members' terrace by 7:45. The terrace was exactly as the photographs had shown it, a wide expanse of pale stone tile bordered by low planters of ornamental grass with cafe-style tables arranged in loose groupings and a clear view over the lower grounds to the 18th hole of the golf course where the morning light was still low and golden, and the dew had not yet burned off the fairway. There were 8 tables, 3 were occupied. The guests at those tables were all white, and they were all eating, and they were all attended. Lenora chose a table near the outer railing, where the light was best and the view widest. She set her canvas tote on the adjacent chair, removed the legal pad and one of the briefs, and placed her reading glasses on her nose. A small laminated sign at the entrance to the terrace read, "Members Terrace. Open to all registered guests, 7 a.m. through 11 a.m. daily. Full breakfast service available." She had read it before she sat down. It said what it said. A server, a young woman of perhaps 22, blonde, in the resort white and green uniform, appeared at the terrace entrance, scanned the tables, and moved toward the nearest occupied table, then the next, then the one after that. 8 minutes passed. The 3 originally occupied tables had been attended twice. A 4th table had been occupied by a couple who arrived 5 minutes after Lenora and had received menus within 90 seconds. Lenora sat. She read. She waited. At the 8-minute mark, she caught the server's eye, a direct neutral look, the kind that required no verbal component and left no room for misinterpretation. The server's name, she would later learn, was Cammy Stout. Cammy held Lenora's gaze for approximately 1 second, then moved toward another table. Lenora set down her pen. She did not call after the server. She did not raise her hand. She simply filed the information away, with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. And she picked up her pen again and continued reading. It was not the first time. It would not be the last. What it was documented. Not officially, not yet, but in the specific internal archive that Black professionals in white majority spaces develop over decades, a running involuntary log of moments, each one individually deniable, each one in aggregate undeniable. The 8-minute wait and the table skipping had been recorded. At the 10-minute mark, a figure appeared at the terrace entrance that had nothing to do with breakfast service. Wade Harston was 47 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, and built in the way of men who had once been athletes and had kept the mass without keeping the flexibility. He had a square jaw, a crew cut gone slightly gray at the temples, and the particular bearing of a man who had spent 11 years in a position of authority in a place that reinforced his authority at every turn. He wore the Cedar Cliff security uniform, dark slacks, white polo. Laminated ID badge on a lanyard, and he walked with the proprietorial ease of someone who had decided a long time ago that this space was his to manage. He scanned the terrace with practiced efficiency. His gaze moved from table to table. It stopped at Lenora. Not for long, no more than 3 seconds. But long enough. The kind of stop that did not require acknowledgement because it was not addressed to the person being assessed. It was addressed to the question of what to do about her. Lenora did not look up from her legal pad. She heard his footsteps approach, unhurried, deliberate, the sound of a man who expected his arrival to be noticed. He stopped 2 feet from her table. "Excuse me." His voice was measured, carrying the particular brand of practiced courtesy that is designed to feel like an extension rather than an offer. This terrace is primarily for members and club guests during morning hours. Lenora looked up. She looked at him over the top of her reading glasses in the way she looked at attorneys who had begun an argument she found insufficient, not hostile, attentive, waiting. The sign at the entrance, she said, says open to all registered guests, 7 to 11. That sign reflects the general policy, Wade said. We have updated the morning access guidelines for the primary terrace. Registered guests have full access to the garden terrace, which is, I am a registered guest, Lenora said. The sign at the entrance says, open to all registered guests. I am sitting at a table in an area that sign indicates is accessible to me. Is there something specific you would like to show me? A printed policy change, a notice, something dated and posted that contradicts that sign? Wade blinked, just once. I am asking you politely to relocate, he said to the garden terrace, which offers a comparable. You are asking me to leave a space I am legally entitled to occupy, Lenora said. She did not raise her voice. She had not raised her voice once. I would like to see the policy change you are referencing. The table nearest to them, a man in his 50s with a Wall Street Journal folded beside his coffee cup, had gone very still. Wade's jaw set. I am going to need you to cooperate with resort management, he said. I am a registered guest sitting on a publicly posted open terrace, Lenora said. She placed her pen on the legal pad. I will wait for the policy documentation. Wade Harston was not accustomed to waiting. In 11 years of resort security at Cedar Cliff Grand, and before that 7 years of small-town law enforcement in a county where the chief of police had known his father and the courthouse had a break room with his name on a coffee mug, he had operated within a framework of understood authority. The framework was simple. He spoke, people complied. The people who did not comply were either intoxicated, unstable, or in his experience, a third category he had identified over many years of practice and never named aloud but acted upon with consistent reliability. Lenora Voss fit the third category. He stepped to the side of the terrace and keyed his radio. Slade, members, terrace. Copy, a pause, then copy. Give me 2. Deputy Slade Mercer of the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office was 38 years old and had been supplementing his sheriff's salary with security work at Cedar Cliff for the past 3 years. The arrangement was informal. A phone call from a resort contact, a flat rate per shift paid in cash, and it existed in the specific gray space between permitted and documented that both parties found convenient. He was off duty when working at the resort. He wore civilian clothes and a Cedar Cliff ID, but he carried his service weapon because he always carried his service weapon, and he moved through the resort with the implicit authority of a man who knew that his other badge was in his back pocket if he needed it. He arrived at the terrace entrance 2.5 minutes after Wade's call. Lenora heard the new footsteps before she looked up. She had been listening since Wade stepped away to radio. She noted the weight of the steps, heavier, wider stance, the rhythm of someone moving with purpose rather than a patrol. She noted the arrival time. She noted that Wade had not provided her with any documentation of a policy change because there was no documentation, because there was no policy change, because the policy was exactly what the sign said it was. She looked up. Slade Mercer was broad-shouldered, with a close-cropped beard and the kind of flat expression that law enforcement officers sometimes mistook for authority. He stopped beside Wade, said nothing for a moment, and looked at Lenora with the assessment of someone who had already decided the shape of the situation before arriving. "Ma'am," he said, "I am going to ask you to cooperate with the resort security request." "I would still like to see the policy documentation," Lenora said. "The staff member has already explained the situation," Mercer said. "He has referenced a policy that does not appear to be posted anywhere on this terrace," Lenora said. "I am a registered guest. I am sitting in an area marked as available to registered guests. I have not raised my voice, created a disturbance, or violated any posted rule. I would like to see whatever documentation supports the claim that I am in violation of anything." Mercer's jaw moved slightly. He glanced at Wade. "You can either relocate voluntarily," Wade said, "or we are going to need to escort you to the front of the property." Lenora set down her pen. She looked at both men with the focused, unhurried attention she brought to arguments she was evaluating. "I suggest you think very carefully," she said, "about what you do next." The tone was not a threat. It was not emotional. It was the tone of someone who had been handed a piece of information and was offering the other party the opportunity to reassess before the information became consequential. Neither man heard it as that. Mercer moved first. There was a moment, and the people on the terrace who were watching felt it, because the air changed slightly, the way air changes before something irreversible happens when everything could have stopped. Wade could have gone to find a manager. Mercer could have asked one more question. The Wall Street Journal man could have said something. Cammy, the server, who had reappeared at the terrace entrance with a coffee tray, could have set it down and walked over. None of that happened. What happened was that Slade Mercer reached out and gripped Lenora Voss's wrist. The grip was not rough. It was something almost worse than rough. It was professional. It was the grip of someone who had applied force to the bodies of others often enough to do so without excess, with the measured precision of a man who knew exactly how much pressure to use and had calibrated it to communicate that compliance was expected and non-compliance would escalate. Lenora did not flinch. She did not pull away. She did not raise her voice. She did three things. She looked at his hand on her wrist. She looked at his face. And she turned her head slowly, deliberately, toward the security camera mounted at the corner of the terrace roof, the one she had noted upon sitting down, the one she had confirmed was operational, by observing its indicator light. "Everything that is happening right now," she said, addressing the camera, rather than the two men, "is being recorded." "Let's go," Mercer said and began moving. What would you have done in that moment, when two people with badges and authority have decided what is going to happen to you, and you are alone and the people around you are watching, but not moving? What would you do? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story has you feeling something right now, hit the like button. It helps other people find stories that matter. There is a particular experience that people in positions of authority, judges, senior law enforcement military commanders, develop over years of professional responsibility. And it is this, the ability to remain completely still on the surface while an interior process runs with absolute clarity. Decisions are made in that stillness. Consequences are anticipated. Options are mapped. And through all of it, the face reveals nothing, except if you know how to read it, a quality of focused attention that is different from passivity and different from submission, and is in fact its precise opposite. Tamara Fields was 22 years old, had worked housekeeping at Cedar Cliff Grand for 8 months, and had never in any of those months done anything she was not supposed to do. She kept her head down. She worked her section. She did not comment on guests. She did not comment on staff. She had learned from her mother and her grandmother before her the specific and time-honored art of making herself invisible in rooms where invisibility was the safest option. She was pushing a housekeeping cart through the interior corridor that ran parallel to the members' terrace when she saw it through the long window. A black woman sitting alone at a table on the terrace, reading glasses on her nose. Papers spread across the table, and 2 white men in resort uniforms, one of whom had now placed his hand on the woman's wrist and was steering her to her feet with the flat efficiency of someone removing something from where it did not belong. Tamara stopped her cart. She looked at the scene for 3 seconds. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. She did not hold it up. She held it at her hip, angled toward the window, the way her mother had taught her to hold things you were not supposed to be holding. The recording started. She stayed where she was. She did not move toward the terrace. She did not intervene. She simply documented with the quiet discipline of someone who understood that documentation was its own form of action. On the terrace, the movement had begun. Wade Harston walked slightly ahead, clearing the path. Mercer walked beside Lenora, his grip on her wrist not tightening, not releasing, simply maintaining the functional neutral of a man who had done this before and expected it to end the same way it always ended. Lenora walked. She walked with her shoulders level and her chin up in the deliberate, measured pace of a woman who is choosing her movement rather than having it chosen for her. The other guests on the terrace watched in the specific way that people in positions of privilege watch injustice occurring in front of them, with the discomfort of recognition and the inertia of people who have constructed their lives around the assumption that what happens to others will not happen to them. Except one. Patricia Delton was 61 years old, from Charlotte, North Carolina, and she had been watching the entire sequence of events from the moment Wade first approached Lenora's table. Her husband, Warren Delton, was a partner at a firm that handled, among other things, federal civil rights cases. Patricia was not a lawyer, but she had been married to one for 34 years, and she recognized with the accuracy of long exposure what she was seeing. She stood up. "Is this really necessary?" she said. Her voice was clear and carried across the terrace. Wade glanced at her. "Resort management issue, ma'am, not a concern for other guests." "It concerns me," Patricia said. "Please return to your breakfast," Mercer said without looking at her. Patricia did not return to her breakfast. She watched. She reached for her phone and began taking photographs. Cammy, the server, stood frozen at the entrance to the terrace with the coffee tray in both hands, watching a woman being escorted across the space she had waited 8 minutes to have acknowledged in. The tray did not waver. Cammy did not move. She would later say to the investigator who took her statement that she had not known what to do. This was true. She would also later say that she had known it was wrong. This was also true. Lenora said as she walked, "I want the name of your general manager." "You will have the opportunity to speak with management," Wade said. "I want his name now." Mitchell Greer, Wade said, because he did not see the reason not to. He would later understand the reason. "Thank you," Lenora said. She said nothing else until they reached the front entrance of the main building. Think about what just happened. A woman who has spent 25 years in the law, who has presided over hundreds of cases, who has issued rulings that have shaped lives. She was gripped by the wrist and walked across a luxury resort terrace because 2 men decided they knew who she was and what she was worth. She said nothing. She kept walking. She knew exactly what she was doing. Did she handle it the way you would have, or would you have done something different? Leave a comment. We read them. And if you are watching this and thinking this kind of thing could not happen today, subscribe our channel and we will show you how many stories we have that say otherwise. The front entrance of Cedar Cliff Grand Resort was a wide space of pale stone and glass with a reception desk to the left and a concierge station to the right. And at that particular moment, 11 people present, 3 couples checking out a family waiting for a shuttle, 2 bellmen with luggage carts, and a doorman who held the door. Lenora Voss was walked through this space by Wade Harston and Slade Mercer, and everyone in the space looked. Some of them looked away immediately. Some held it longer. The family with the shuttle, a couple in their 40s, and 2 teenage children, watched with the focused attention of people who understand without needing to be told the weight of what they are seeing. Tamara Fields had followed at a distance, her phone still recording from the interior corridor, moving toward the lobby through the connecting hallway. Patricia Delton had followed from the terrace, directly, her own phone raised. The doorman, a man of about 60, named Vernon, who had worked the entrance of Cedar Cliff for 14 years, stepped aside without expression. He had seen things at this entrance over those 14 years. He had learned that expression was a luxury he could not always afford. Wade stopped at the center of the lobby and keyed his radio again. "Greer, main entrance. Now please." Mitchell Greer appeared from the management corridor behind the front desk in less than 90 seconds. He was 48 years old, trim and silver-haired in a dark blazer, with the Cedar Cliff emblem on the breast pocket. and he had the particular quality of a man who had managed expensive problems for a long time and had become very good at managing the perception of expensive problems. "What is the situation, Wade?" he said, approaching with the smooth efficiency of a man who had learned to walk fast without appearing rushed. "Guest was non-compliant on the member's terrace," Wade said, "refusing to relocate per updated policy, requesting a management. I would like to speak with you," Lenora said to Greer, cutting across Wade's summary with a precision that did not require volume. Greer turned to her with the prepared warmth of a man about to de-escalate.
"Of course. Ma'am, I apologize for any confusion this morning. I am Mitchell Greer, the general manager, and I want to assure you that we value—" "I will need a moment," Lenora said. She reached into the canvas tote she had carried with her. The entire time, never set down, never released, kept on her shoulder through the entire walk from the terrace to the lobby. Her hand moved inside the bag with the deliberate efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything was. What she removed was not her room key. It was not her phone. It was not a credit card or a hotel confirmation, or any of the objects a person might produce to establish their identity in a place that had decided to question it. It was a leather folio, dark brown, approximately 5 by 7 inches, with the seal of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit embossed on the cover. The seal showed the scales of justice enclosed in a circular border, and below the scales, in small but entirely legible type, the words United States Court of Appeals. Fourth Circuit. She opened it. Inside, under a protective acetate cover, was the judicial commission issued upon her appointment to the bench, a formal document signed by the President of the United States and countersigned by the Attorney General, bearing her full name and her title, United States Circuit Judge, Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, and the date of her appointment, and the seal of the federal government embossed in gold at the upper left corner, the kind of seal that is applied once and applied permanently, and carries with it the weight of a constitutional appointment that no resort general manager and no head of security and no off-duty deputy had any authority over at any point in any scenario that had ever occurred in the history of American law. She placed the folio on the concierge station beside her open. Then she looked at Mitchell Greer. The lobby had gone very quiet. Greer looked at the folio. He read it. He read it the way a person reads a document. "They are hoping with increasing desperation will say something other than what it says." His face moved through a sequence of expressions: confusion, recognition, comprehension, the specific pallor of a man who has just understood what kind of morning he is having. He said her name. "Not ma'am, not miss, not the guest." He said Judge Voss. The way he said it was very quiet, almost a whisper. The kind of voice a person uses when they are trying to make a statement small enough to contain the size of what has just happened. Wade Harston was standing 2 feet to Greer's left, and he looked at the folio at the same moment Greer did, and the color left his face in a progression that was almost measurable, the pink of his complexion moving through a pale intermediate and arriving at a gray that had no warmth in it at all. His jaw was still. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, became very still. Slade Mercer had released Lenora's wrist at some point during the approach to the lobby. She had noted the exact moment, and he was standing slightly behind and to the right of Wade, and he looked at the folio and then at the seal. And then he took one small step backward. His hand, which had been resting near his radio, moved to his side. Neither man said anything. The lobby was not empty. The 3 couples who had been checking out had stopped moving. The family with the shuttle had turned. The 2 bellmen stood at their carts. The doorman, Vernon, had taken a step inward from the door. Tamara Fields had reached the lobby hallway and stood at the edge of the connecting corridor phone at her hip recording. Patricia Delton stood near the entrance phone raised openly now. The silence lasted approximately 5 seconds. Lenora broke it. "I would like 3 things," she said, addressing Greer. Her voice was level, unhurried, and entirely without performance. "The general manager's direct contact number, your number, the legal name of the corporate parent company for this resort, and the full legal names of both of these individuals." She looked in turn at Wade and at Mercer. "All 3. Now please." Greer's mouth opened. He appeared to be assembling language. "Judge Voss," he said again, "I want to personally apologize." "The names," Lenora said. Greer said Wade's name. He said Mercer's name. He said his own direct number with the halting certainty of a man who is no longer sure which answer is safest.
He said the name of the parent company Ashbourne Hospitality Group, incorporated in Delaware, and he said it the way a man recites facts he wishes were different. Lenora removed a pen from the canvas tote and wrote everything on the legal pad she had carried from the terrace. She wrote it in the careful, unhurried hand of a woman taking notes that will be read later by people who matter. Mitchell Greer offered a sweet upgrade. Lenora declined it. He offered complimentary dining for the remainder of her stay. She declined that as well. He offered, in a slightly desperate third pass, a direct written apology on resort letterhead. She told him she would not be reading anything on resort letterhead until she had consulted with the appropriate parties. She said this without heat and without pleasure, the way a judge tells an attorney that their filing is deficient as a statement of procedural reality. Greer stood in his lobby with the expression of a man watching a consequence arrive that he had been told by the architecture of his professional life would never come. He had managed this resort for 7 years. He had managed the specific ecosystem of this resort, its guests, its staff, its unstated policies and unwritten expectations for 7 years. He had hired Wade Harston and extended the moonlighting arrangement with Slade Mercer and said nothing when Paige at the front desk declined to push back on desk-level decisions that had a pattern and a consistency and an explanatory simplicity that he had preferred not to examine. He looked at the folio on the concierge station. He looked at Judge Lenora Voss, who had returned her pen to her bag and was gathering her legal pad. He said quietly, "Is there anything I can do?" Lenora looked at him. "There is nothing," she said, "that you can do right now that would be more useful than getting out of my way." She walked to the concierge station, retrieved her folio, replaced it in the canvas tote, and turned toward the elevator bank. Patricia Delton intercepted her at the edge of the lobby, quietly stepping slightly to the side so they were not in the center of the room.
"I do not mean to intrude," Patricia said. Her voice was low. "I watched all of it. I have photographs. My husband is Warren Delton. He is a partner at Delton Marsh in Charlotte. Civil rights, federal cases. I wanted you to have our number if it is useful."
Lenora looked at her.
"Thank you," she said. She accepted the card Patricia offered. Then Tamara Fields appeared at the edge of the lobby hallway. She was 22 and still had the housekeeping apron on, and she was holding her phone with the careful stillness of someone who understood the weight of what they were carrying.
"Your Honor," she said.
Her voice was nearly inaudible. She had never used that address before, but she knew it was correct the way people sometimes know things without being taught. "I recorded it. From when they first. From the beginning. The terrace and the lobby."
Lenora looked at her for a moment.
"What is your name?" "Tamara Fields."
Tamara, Lenora said. "I want you to back that video up to a second location right now. Cloud storage email to yourself, whatever you have. Do not delete anything. Do not share it with anyone at this resort. Can you do that?"
Tamara nodded. Her hands were steady. "I already sent it to my email," she said, "before I came in here."
Lenora held her gaze for 3 seconds.
"Good," she said. "That was the right thing."
She returned to her room. She sat at the writing desk by the window and opened her legal pad to a clean page. She wrote a timeline, not the informal notes she had taken in the lobby, but a formal, precisely detailed account, times, locations, direct quotations as close to verbatim as memory and training. Allowed the names of witnesses, the sequence of physical contact, the words Slade, Mercer gripped my wrist with the time notation approximately 9:14 a.m. beside them. She wrote for 47 minutes without stopping. Then she picked up her phone. The first call she made was to the 4th Circuit's Judicial Conduct and Disability Office. She left a message for the duty officer with a brief factual summary of the incident and a statement that she would be submitting formal documentation within 24 hours. The second call she made was to a colleague in the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. Not a request for action, not yet, but a notification. Something has happened here. Are the facts? Please be available for follow-up. The third call she made was to a number she had carried in her contacts for 11 years without once using it. A man answered on the second ring. "This is Lenora Voss," she said. "I need 30 minutes of your time." The first consequence arrived 48 hours after the incident. Wade Harston received a letter from the Cedar Cliff Grand Resort Human Resources Office at 9:15 a.m. on April 16th, delivered to his home address by certified mail, and simultaneously to his resort email, which he could no longer access because his credentials had been deactivated at 9 a.m. The letter cited in the bloodless language of HR documentation conduct inconsistent with resort standards and core values of inclusive hospitality. Failure to adhere to documented guest access policy and actions resulting in significant reputational harm to Ashbourne Hospitality Group. It informed him that his employment was terminated effective immediately. It informed him that his unused vacation days would be paid out. It informed him that he should return his security credentials and resort ID to the front desk before end of business. Wade Harston had been the head of security at Cedar Cliff Grand for 11 years. He returned his credentials that afternoon. The front desk clerk accepted them without ceremony and placed them in an envelope with practiced efficiency. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for 12 minutes afterward. He did not file a wrongful termination claim. The second consequence arrived for Slade Mercer. The Beaufort County Sheriff's Office opened an internal affairs investigation on April 17th. The investigation was triggered by a formal complaint filed by the Fourth Circuit's Conduct Office, not on behalf of Lenora personally, but as a matter of institutional record. A federal judge had been subject to unlawful physical contact by a county law enforcement officer acting in a private capacity. The investigation was assigned to a senior IA lieutenant named Diane Wicks, who had a reputation for following facts wherever they led, and a file cabinet full of complaints from officers who had learned this the hard way. The complaint included Tamara Fields' video. Tamara had not released the video publicly, not yet. She had provided it through a carefully structured legal pathway established by Warren Delton's office to the conduct investigation. It showed in clear and uninterrupted footage the full sequence: Mercer's grip on Lenora's wrist, the escort across the terrace, the walk through the lobby, and the moment when Lenora opened her credentials folio and Mitchell Greer said her name. The footage also captured in the last 17 seconds something that Tamara had not realized: she had recorded Wade Harston's face at the moment of recognition. Not the gray pallor which was visible, but the specific expression in his eyes, something that was not quite shock and not quite shame, but occupied the same territory as both, and the 3 seconds of absolute stillness that followed it before any word or gesture. Mercer was placed on administrative leave pending the IA review. His off-duty security arrangement was suspended. The investigation was expected to take 4 to 6 weeks. The third consequence arrived for Mitchell Greer. He was not terminated. He was demoted. The restructuring of his position was announced internally as a regional management realignment, but Greer had worked in hospitality long enough to read the specific language of a managed departure, and he understood that he was being retained for the duration of the investigation because his cooperation was useful and would be repositioned thereafter. He cooperated with the investigation. The fourth consequence arrived for Ashbourne Hospitality Group. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division sent a formal inquiry letter to Ashbourne's General Counsel's office in Wilmington, Delaware on April 18th, 4 days after the incident. The letter referenced Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race in places of public accommodation, and requested documentation of the resort's guest access policies, staff training records, and complaint histories over the preceding 3 years. The letter was 6 pages long. Ashbourne's stock dropped 2% on the day the inquiry letter was reported by a business journalist in Wilmington. Warren Delton's office filed a civil rights complaint with the DOJ on behalf of 3 additional individuals, 2 black guests and 1 Latino guest, who had documented incidents of differential treatment at Cedar Cliff Grand over the preceding 18 months. The complaint included incident reports, emails, photographs, and in one case, a dated journal entry that the complainant had written the evening after her treatment by resort staff. The pattern was visible once it was assembled. It had been there the entire time. On April 22nd, 8 days after the incident, Warren Ose, an investigative journalist for a regional publication that had previously covered civil rights cases in the Carolinas, published a 3,400-word piece. The article assembled the formal filings, the DOJ inquiry letter, and the civil rights complaint into a documented narrative. The article included a still frame from Tamara Fields' video, released with her consent and with the careful legal guidance of Warren Delton's office, that showed a woman sitting alone at a cafe table on a resort terrace, reading, glasses on her nose, papers spread in front of her, with 2 men in security uniforms standing over her. The image needed no caption. It was shared 47,000 times in the first 12 hours. Ashbourne's stock dropped another 2%. Slade Mercer's IA review concluded on May 9th. Lieutenant Wicks's findings documented that Deputy Mercer had engaged in physical contact with a resort guest in circumstances that did not meet the legal threshold for any lawful detention restraint or force, and that this contact had occurred while Mercer was operating in a private security capacity without the explicit authorization of the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office. The findings recommended a 30-day suspension, mandatory retraining in civil rights law and detainee handling protocols, and a formal prohibition on off-duty security employment for the following 18 months. The findings were accepted. Mercer served the suspension. The prohibition on off-duty employment cost him approximately $11,000 in annual income. Wade Harston applied for 3 security director positions between April and June. 2 responded. 1 conducted a phone interview. None proceeded. His name was in the article. And then on a morning in early May, 26 days after the incident, Lenora Voss returned to Hilton Head. Not to Cedar Cliff Grand. She had no reason to return to Cedar Cliff Grand, and several good reasons not to. She returned because the beach at Hilton Head in early May has a specific quality of light in the morning, low and gold and long hamang shadowed that she had been thinking about since she drove away from the island on April 15th. And because she had found in the particular quiet of the coastal barrier island something she had not been willing to forfeit simply because a man with a security polo had decided she did not belong on a terrace. She stayed at a different property, smaller, no golf course. A screen porch that faced east where the morning light came in at an angle she found useful. On the second morning, she was on the screen porch by 7 Legal Pad open coffee at her elbow, the sound of the Atlantic close enough to hear without being loud. She was reviewing a brief in a Fourth Amendment case that had been assigned to her panel for the fall term. She worked until 9:30. Then she set the brief aside, picked up her coffee, and looked at the water. The light had shifted higher, warmer, the long morning shadows retreating toward noon. The palmettos in the yard moved in the offshore breeze. Somewhere below the porch, a sandpiper was working the edge of the dune line with the focused, unhurried efficiency of a creature that knew exactly what it was doing and required no audience. She had received the previous week a letter from the Chief Judge of the Fourth Circuit, an invitation to join an advisory panel on federal judicial ethics reform. The panel's focus included the question of how judges who personally experience the conditions they are called to adjudicate maintain the integrity of that adjudication. It was, she recognized, a real question. One she had written about obliquely in a footnote to a ruling 3 years ago in a passage she had debated including and had included anyway because it was true. She had not yet responded to the letter. She thought about it now with the coffee cooling in her hand and the sandpiper working the dune line. She had spent 25 years in the law. She had spent 9 of those years on the federal bench. She had read hundreds of cases with the dual attention of a judge trained to evaluate evidence and a black woman in America who knew from the particular mathematics of lived experience that the distance between the law as written and the law as applied was not always theoretical. She had known it before that morning on the terrace. She had known it for a long time. What had changed was not her knowledge. What had changed was the specific nature of the evidence she was now carrying. The sandpiper moved on. The light came in off the water, warm in particular, and not interested in anything except illuminating what was there. She picked up her pen. She began writing her response to the Chief Judge's letter. There is a sign at the entrance to a terrace in Hilton Head, South Carolina. It reads, "Open to all registered guests, 7 a.m. through 11 a.m. daily." It still says what it says. Like this story, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe our channel, because there are more stories like this one, and every single one of them deserves to be told. Thank you for watching this story with us. Stories like this one matter not because they are easy to sit with, but because they remind us that dignity is not conditional, and that the people who try to strip it away rarely know what they are reaching for until it is too late. We appreciate every one of you who stayed until the end. See you in the next one.